Yeah, I work for Montana DNRC, and most of you know that we're a wildland fire protection agency, among other things. We're a natural resource agency, but one of the big things we do is a wildland fire protection agency. We've got direct responsibility for about 5.2 million acres of private and state forested land. And then indirectly, we are responsible for another 56 million acres of county co-op protection, what we call county co-op protection. So we're involved in the interface in a big way, just trying to provide the fire suppression for it. We're the state agency that it has the responsibility for wildland fire protection on private ground, and we handle that, like I said, either by we actually hire seasonal firefighters and provide the protection, or we contract that to the Forest Service and they protect it. The Forest Service also has their ground that they're responsible for, the federal land, and the Forest Service isn't the only federal agency that we contract with. We also contract with the BLM to do some of that protection, but they are only protecting private land by virtue of a contract for the state of Montana. It's the state of Montana's responsibility, not the Forest Service's. And in the last, I think it was Patty Canyon that probably got, and some other big fires 20 years ago that got us. And I think the whole fire community really aware that we had to deal with this change in the fire environment. And in the last 10 years, I think we've really done a lot. Most of it, I think, has been aimed at our suppression operations. You know, we've geared up, we've tried to train our firefighters on how to operate safely in that environment. We've taken cross-training from the structural folks. We've entered into pre-attack plans where we've defined whose responsibility it is to do certain things, whether it's the local rural fire district or city fire department or a wildland agency. We bought new equipment. Our engines have changed over the last 20 years to more reflect that. They carry more water, they pump faster, they hook up to hydrants. We've defined real clearly in our policies what we will and won't do in an interface fire to make it clear to ourselves and everybody else that we're a wildland fire agency, and so we, as opposed to a structural suppression agency, we cannot put out a house fire or fight a house fire. We're not trained or equipped for that, and our policy says we absolutely will not enter a burning structure. You have to balance that with our goals are still protecting life and property, and so our main goal in the interface is to probably protect life safety, but it's very clear that we won't enter a building. So most of our actions are going to be fighting a wildland fire, either protecting a structure from an oncoming wildland fire or protecting the wildland from a fire starting in a structure and escaping to the wildland fire, to the wildland. We've also been involved, the legislature directed our department to work with other state agencies and federal agencies and associations of realtors, and to come up with some solutions to the interface problem. And one of the things they came up with were some draft guidelines for development in the interface, what would be good building standards, like 2 ways into a subdivision in heavy fuels, or wide, roads that are wide enough to handle large fire apparatus, turnarounds, things like that. And so that group. So we've done a lot of trying to educate the public, trying to inform the public of the danger they're in. And then we've also worked on a strategic plan that kind of further defines our goals, and there are 7 goals that deal specifically with the wildland-urban interface. but I think we've kind of done everything we can to educate the public. I mean, I'm frustrated because I worked for a lot of years at the local level here in Missoula and held a lot of seminars and talked to a lot of people, and I think, 10 years ago it was that the public really wasn't aware of the problem, but I think now, like in the newspaper the other day, they talked about gustnadoes that has entered the public lexicon. I think wildland-urban interface has too. I think the media has done a lot better job of presenting the problem since 1988, since Yellowstone, and they're more accurate in describing the problem. And so I think the public has a general idea of what the problem is and what interface is. And I think now my concern is how do you get the public to do anything? I mean, what can you use to motivate I see it as two problems that the people need to do more fuel modification themselves. The landowners need to do that, and I don't know how to motivate them to do that anymore. I mean, you can only tell them so many times that this is a problem, but I don't. It seems like it's just these big fires that motivates them when they, the snowball fire, driving up the second day of the shift, and you see somebody out there raking the needles out of their lawn. Well, it's too late after the fire's made a good run the afternoon before to start thinking about raking your lawn at that point in time. But I don't know how to put a monetary hook into them, whether it's insurance or, I've noticed the realtors talk a lot more about it. Last time we bought our house, the realtors were more aware of the problem when they were dealing with. And then the other thing that I feel strongly about is we know what it takes to build developments that fires will be less severe in and will cost less to put out. And so we need to do that, but we don't, because it costs money now. I mean, it's going to cost developers more money to put in a water system that's adequate. It's going to cost them more to put in wider roads, and then that's going to get passed on. But I really feel like, that it's either pay now or pay later. I mean, we've really beefed up our fire suppression forces, and that's good. I think we've had a lot of success stopping the fires, but on the other hand, our suppression costs have gone way, way up, and everybody pays for that. That comes out of the general fund, not just the forest landowners. They don't pay for the suppression costs, but the city of Missoula citizens pay for it. The city of Billings pay for our fires over here, and I think we pay for it through increased insurance. When Oakland burned in '87, all states' rates went up all over the country, and so we ended up, and I'm starting to get a little angry about that. I mean, I'm getting tired of paying for like floods that people build in the floodplain again. I'm tired of paying for people's houses. And then one of the things that hit home for me also was the firestorm in Spokane, because it's the same fuel type. And some of the video I saw after that showed people that it wasn't the monetary value. I mean, I think that's a big part of it. And I think as I'm coming from a public official government, I think if we see a solution, we ought to be pushing it. And so I'm willing to pay more up front. But what I saw in both the Oakland fire and the Spokane fires were the things that money can't replace. The real trauma, talking to survivors of fire, is the things like family heirlooms that can never be replaced, or a person's life's work, when his shop burns down and he's put his whole life into that, or a person's pet, or, insurance can't pay for that. And in a person's life especially, when you see the people trying to get out of Oakland in that traffic jam, I don't know if any of you saw that. I can picture that right outside of Missoula in one of these canyons, and people were really panicked and really fleeing, and people died in that fire. And, I think 14 out of the 16 deaths were on a street that narrowed down and they couldn't get out of. We know these things. I mean, we know that if that's a problem, we can build a wider road so that people can get out safely, and we will never have to lose a life. It's just, do we want to make that investment now, or do we want to wait 20 years till the fire happens? And it's inevitable. It's part of the ecosystem. The forests around here are are the way they are because of fire, not in spite of fire. So that's that's where I'm coming from. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think people react to, so I'm getting more and more towards regulation and making people do that. But I understand there's problems with that too.
I had to think long and hard why I would even come to this meeting, and actually I didn't think long and hard. I knew why, but I thought that I would begin by just telling you that. First of all, I'm a policymaker as an elected official and can have some effect that Larry was mentioning needs to happen in the Missoula area in particular. Secondly, I was a supporter of this kind of land use practice that would encourage not only good stewardship of the forest, but good land use that would prevent this kind of activity. Third, I'm a growth management task force member, which is really important. And the growth management task force, of course, has charged itself with dealing with quality of life issues in the overall Missoula environment. And many times that requires some behavioral change. We don't know how hard that is, but we're bound and determined to work on that in a very hard way. And lastly, I'm a member of the East Side Coalition of the ICBMP, which is the ecosystem, quarter-of-a-million-mile ecosystem for the Columbia Basin. And there's a broad acknowledgement in Congress and, of course, by the administration that we're in serious difficulties in that ecosystem. And part of it has to do with our past stewardship, and part of it has to do with current land use practices, and a lot of it has to do with really our behavior, our exploration behavior of the Western. And with that, what I'd like to do is just touch on the three questions that were presented to me, and I'll do that very shortly, because what I really want to do is prompt some discussion from you all. I agree so far with everything that Larry said, and I really second that, so I'll try not to double up. But the first question is, what is your agency's investment in it? And of course, we're interested from a broad standpoint of habitat loss. Of course, is a big issue in Missoula County. That's why a lot of people live here, is because of the wildlife that it provides and the scenic views. The natural resource protection issues are big. The overall development costs of the community are enormous. Part of that has to do with insurance, of course. It takes more cost, and it just generally costs more to provide emergency services to areas in the interface than it does in the area closer to general services in the city. Emergency services, I mentioned, air quality is an enormous issue. Air quality, of course, is affected by fire. And it's also affected by getting back and forth to the places that people live within that zone, and that's really a very important thing. And if you think about it for a moment, fire's always been with us, and the overall air quality issue with respect to fire will always be with us. We're not going to be able to ever get rid of that. But the other part of it, and that is the driving that is involved in living in those areas, is something we can do about. In the Missoula Valley, almost 3/4 of the overall air pollution problem we have isn't forest fires, it's cars. And so we have a vested interest in dealing with that very serious problem, because it's a major health issue in the Missoula Valley. Second question has to do with the concerns and the conflicts that we have in dealing with this challenge. And first and foremost, there's the Western behavior that we have, and we're all guilty of that. We all want our piece of the wilderness, and some of us are lucky enough to buy it. The second is the overall personal property right issue that you see virtually every time you read the newspaper. Of course, of late, that's even an issue that we're discussing in the Growth Management Task Force. And it's a huge issue, and I think what we have to conclude about that is that, yes, personal property rights are very, very important, and they may be the most important thing here, except the rights of everyone else. And I think that's the part that's missing, and we really have to pay very, very close attention to those rights. The one thing that Larry mentioned that I really want to touch on, and that is that, and it's a behavioral pattern as well, there's a false sense of security that we have developed in this valley, and part of the reason for that is the excellent fire suppression methodologies that we've employed, the very good equipment, and the very strong people, and the good training that's there. The inward migration into this area by people who are on the outside who have never been exposed to this kind of fire environment. and of course the infrequency of fire. Now, we've seen the video of all those, and some of us have been around long enough to remember maybe all of those fires, but many people who moved here have never been exposed to that at all, and that's why they'd like to live. That's one reason that they have for living in areas that way. They simply don't believe that those fires exist, as people who live in the floodplain don't believe that they're possible to be flooded. So I think that false sense of security and a behavioral problem are perhaps paramount as far as the issues that we have to overcome. And part of that is this man's fault because he does such a good job. And we have to really pay attention to that, and we have to get that message somehow out. How can we improve the situation? Well, I think the overall philosophy of land use and land ethic has to change, and I see that changing. And in the ICBMP process, what I notice is that not only the stewards of the land, the people who are charged in the federal government or the land, that attitude has changed, but also the interested citizens who are affected by those policies and the people who live and work in those areas are changing. And I think the overall language that we have now is changing, and education, of course, is part of that, but overall consciousness and awareness and the closeness that we live now to one another is another cause for this very important change. Some of the things that we can do in addition to land ethic change and philosophy change, of course, our education, as I mentioned. And the third one is impact fees. And I was glad to hear Larry again say that we need to perhaps begin charging for this. And it's interesting that as far as fire protection is concerned, it doesn't matter in certain areas of Missoula whether you live next to the fire station or perhaps 5 miles out. In certain areas, your fire insurance is the same. I think that needs to change, because why should those people be subsidized? And I'm one of those people who have my little carved out chunk of the wilderness. Why should I be subsidized simply because I was able to afford an area like that? I live 7 miles out of town, and I often think, because and this caused me to ride my bike to work, and I do this virtually every day. Where is it written that I can add 7 times the pollution to the air in Missoula County as those who live only 1 mile away? It's the same concept. But we somehow have to eliminate the subsidy for people who choose to live in the areas that they do. And it is my belief that if we're on a level playing field and those subsidies are gone, just maybe people would make other choices, and it would lessen some of that problem. And so with that, I hope it's prompted several questions from you, and I'll pass it back to you.
Let me ask the group here a question. I'm curious in the audience how many people who actually own property in the what we call the interface zone, that wildland area, and that's why you're here tonight. That's good, because I had the impression, perhaps wrongly, that there are a lot of people from Forest Service or fire prevention, and I'm glad to hear that there are some people here who actually own property to get some information. What's the insurance industry investment or involvement in this area? And I can speak in a broader area for the insurance industry or State Farm, but what I would tell you is that our investment is leveraged, if you will. The insurance industry is a middle person. We collect funds and hold them in reserves for future events. And when you think of your fire insurance, of course, the premiums that you pay support the rebuilding of your home if it burns. It also supports other perils such as litigation or liability or internal water flooding. So there are a multitude of perils that your fire insurance, which you think of as fire insurance, is held to pay for. Our investment in that, I've been involved in, personally as an agent, involved in claims that are a few $100s to over $250,000 in fire losses. And what I would say to you folks is that our business is to pay out those dollars, and we do that pretty efficiently. But what we can't replace is what's been touched on earlier, some of those images you see in the fire where a trike is sitting there in the ashes, the hearth is all that remains of the property or the homestead, and you see some of that last-minute effort to defend the home, the teenager with the fire hose hoping that the fire doesn't go her direction. As was said earlier, it's a little bit too late. So our investment is in that educational process. We distribute a lot of information to people at time of purchase or time of building on how they can do a better job of insulating or protecting their home. what conflicts or concerns do you see contributing to the challenge? I think some of the challenges and conflicts are that there's a market system out there and people want things. And as Michael Kennedy indicated, he voted with his dollars to buy in a certain place. And if you have the capacity to do that, that's some of the private property rights. And there's always somebody willing to sell that property. There's realtors who want to gain a commission. The insurance business is a competitive business also. There are yellow pages full of insurance companies and agents, all who are vying for your premium dollars. And generally speaking, there are very few people who are interested in not a great deal more than trying to get the last $20 bill out of that transaction at the time of closing. There are very few people who come to our office, and I would think this might be true in the entire industry, with a genuine interest in trying to find out how they can improve their property, how they can make it more safe. What do I think can be done to improve the situation? Well, other than the educational aspect, I would submit to you people who live in this wooded area that the attitude that you need to begin to take is a mindset that there is absolutely no fire protection, whether there's a fire department within 1 mile or 10 miles of you, that you're going to have a fire someday, and that despite the fact that you didn't pay for insurance, if you could have the mindset that your home was uninsured, and then tomorrow morning or this weekend go out to your property and say, what are the necessary steps that I have to take to make my property be the only one that survives on my block? Until you get that mindset, your home will not be fire safe in a wildfire. Because I think I've heard this said before, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the policy of your local fire people is to not put people or equipment at risk. In other words, they're not going to send equipment up a road where they can't get them out. So if you're the last house with no turnaround in a single lane road, you're lucky to get out of there alive. So what you need to do is get that information, some of which we have tonight, and implement it. And unless you expect mandatory or compulsory measures from government, I think this is an individual private decision. And if we don't improve the situation on our own, you're going to be faced with those kind of measures. And I heard some of those insurance industry things, and I'll wait to hear them again before I try to respond to them, because I think there are a couple of misconceptions maybe where I'd like the other panelists to jump in.
Thanks, Steve. That's pretty thought-provoking. Well, from the planner's perspective, Phil, what do you think?
Well, I guess one of the things that we as a city-county planning agency have invested in this is that we do try to plan ahead. Some people would argue we don't plan ahead fast enough, but we do try to do that. And in our comprehensive planning processes, we do plans for neighborhoods and areas, and some of you may have been or read about the Miller Creek plan, for example, where there's a very clear discussion, even in the Miller Creek planning process itself, about the need to deal with the wildland interface from a fuel management standpoint and from a safety standpoint. The kinds of things that Laurie was talking about road widths and so forth, are part of that process, but also making sure that people know that when they go and move into the woods or even into the grasslands, that the danger of fire is great and it's not predictable. From a regulatory standpoint, we actually have fire management regulations in our subdivision regulations, and that's the other thing that we do as a city-county agency. And we've added, in 1994, with Bill participating and a number of other people participating in this, Chuck Gibson, who's here from the city, we added a whole section on what we call we call them fire standards. And the purpose of that is the reduction of risk of fire damage by reducing and managing the buildup of fuels, building and maintaining adequate road systems, providing adequate water to firefighters, and using fire-resistant materials and designs for homes and outbuildings. Prior to that, there was no mention in our codes, in our subdivision code, even of the Uniform Fire Code as a standard. And so those things at least are in our subdivision regulations. And when someone comes in with a subdivision proposal in the interface area, they have to do an environmental assessment. They have to look at the landscape resources that are there, the physical structure that's there, If they're in a place where it's very clear that there's high fuel buildup, there are standards for thinning that we have in our toolkit, I guess you could call it, in subdivision regulations that prescribe how they're supposed to behave. From a follow-up standpoint, we don't have people actually going out and making sure that they've done it, but at least the rules are there and the standards are in place to deal with those things, and that includes even roofing material types. There are prescriptions for the waiver of the right to an SID or a rural SID for a second access. If there isn't a second access in place to the subdivision, then the county feels that or the city feels that they have to put it in place. That's kind of what we do. From an overall planning perspective, much of the county, when it adopted a plan in 1975, was designated as open and resource lands. And that's a very low-density level of residential development. The minimum that was set at the time was one house per 40 acres. Well, obviously, if every 40-acre piece of land was occupied by houses, we'd be in big trouble. But it turns out that we, in fact, are not dispersed quite that way. The Paddy Canyon Fire, one of the interesting things about it is that it has zoning in place which allows a density, and was put in place in the early 70s, I believe, which allows for a density, and allowed at that time for a density of one house per 5 acres. Well, if you look at that landscape now, you can see, of course, all the houses are out in the middle of what appears to be a clear cut, which is the area that burned. In a wooded environment, one house per 5 acres may not be the appropriate type of density unless it's constructed and configured in a certain way. And that brings us to the second thing, the conflict, and that's people's desire to live out in this landscape that we all understand fairly well, and many of us work in. And that's where we're going to have those kinds of conflicts, because a lot of development that has happened, for example, has happened in areas and on lots that were not reviewed by the county and not reviewed by the rural fire district or the rural fire department, because of exemptions that were in place up until recently through the state Subdivision and Planning Act. Now that leaves lots of lots out there in the landscape, in the interface area, where development can take place, and the property rights issue is a very interesting one in these cases. Someone comes in to get a building permit on a lot that was legally filed with the county. It's pretty hard to say no, even if the county plan says that it should be at a very low density, one house per 40 acres or something like that. Now, how do we improve it? One of the things, of course, is through education. Better regulations and better options for people, and better examples of how to do it. Actual examples, field trips, tours, hands-on demonstrations, and videos like other videos than ones that just show buildings burning. I think it goes some way to doing that. But a lot of it is, as Commissioner Kennedy said, is a lifestyle issue and a matter of choice, and I think we're going to have to deal with that one too. But better opportunities and better standards for people to manage the fuels and do, as Steve said, to make your place as safe as you can, thinking that the fire department will not get there. And in the case of my own personal case, I live on a fairly small registered tree farm that is in that interface area, and my thinning around my house, at least according to Joe Scott, looks okay. But I think it takes that extra effort.
Obviously, the Missoula County Association of Realtors and many of the area builders have a huge investment in the urban interface and in the development of that interface. Unfortunately, as realtors, many times we come into the process in the 11th hour and after the fact, when many of these homes have already been designed and built, and we have the responsibility of marketing and selling these homes. We have tried as an association, and I think it's been alluded to already, that we have made an attempt to try and educate our customers in many different ways to the dangers that can arise in building in the urban interface. And we've added a section to our buy-sell agreement addressing wildfire risk and asking them to pursue advice in this area as well, which I think is trying to at least to address the problem. I have to confess, though, that we do still have a problem educationally. We need to do a better job as an association of realtors, as professionals, to go out and find the proper resources to send our customers and our clients to in the event. We need to know what those resources are, and right now it's difficult, to go through those channels. As I mentioned, I mean, I think as a group of professionals, we have an obligation to disclose the risks, to our potential buyers and sellers, and obtain as much information as we can. The key to improving the problem, I believe, lies in education. And I would totally agree with Philip in that respect. Education of not only architects, but builders, realtors, and the buyers and sellers themselves in the marketplace. I was talking with Steve earlier, and my company, we're probably one of the largest custom home builders in this community. And we build a lot of homes in the interface. And we see a lot of plans drawn in various areas of the country that really don't fit the scope of the interface very well. They're poorly designed with regard to everything from chimney screens to proper roofing materials to, you name it. So I think, we need to do a better job of communicating with our architects and educating our architects and the people when they come in to our individual area concerns. To answer the second question with regard to the concerns or conflicts contributing to the challenge, from our industry perspective, probably the biggest area of concern is private property rights. Michael Kennedy has already alluded to that one as well. I'm going to come at you from a different perspective in that I think the key once again here is education and not more governmental regulation. A concern outlined in this question here that I would have is that more governmental regulation with regard to this area could create an us versus them type mentality. And overall could be counterproductive to the safe and functional construction of housing within the interface. Probably the most significant concern, addressing the concerns and conflicts question again, would be how rapid the interface is growing. And I think that's already been mentioned with the Patty Canyon, footprint. It's incredible the amount of housing that is being constructed in the interface at this point in time. And I don't have any answers as to how to slow that, but I would suggest that sensible support by our local and state governments with regard to infill development may encourage or take some pressure away from the demands that are being placed on the interface at this point in time. In other words, I think we need to look to and embrace and support responsible, sensible infill developments that lie within the confines of the Missoula Valley. I don't think any of us as realtors or real estate professionals want to see our hillsides bulldozed any further. But we can't have it both ways. And I think from our perspective, we're treating this growth as if it's a given. And where are we going to direct that growth, and how are we going to manage that growth? And when we have good, sensible projects that are proposed in areas that are not in the interface, I think certainly my position, and I can't speak for the entire Association of Realtors, but my position would be that we need to embrace and support those types of developments. Finally, how can it be improved? Well, that's a really difficult question for us. I think, as I've mentioned before, I think the only thing we can do is try to develop an aggressive education program targeted at a number of fields within the development industry. That's architects, developers, builders, realtors, and buyers and sellers, to create more awareness about the dangers associated with building within the urban interface. And I think that's the key. I think the key is communication and education, and not further regulation. So thanks for the opportunity to air our concerns. I hope I've generated some questions as well.
Thank you, John. And finally, to wrap up, Bill Lindstrom from Missoula Rural Fire District, representing the Missoula County Fire Protection Association.
I'm afraid it's not going to be too much of a wrap-up. We've covered just about every point that Scott asked me to hit for MCFPA. I'd like to, I've never had the opportunity to thank Bruce. Bruce and Steve Holden and Dan Bailey, I think in 1982 is what you said, wasn't it, Bruce, started the Missoula County Fire Protection Association. And I don't think that fire agencies would be as far as they are in this field if it weren't for that agency or association. A lot of the things that I had in the notes that Scott Walden was supposed to talk, he got hold of me a couple hours ago and said he had a problem. I'm going to go through these things really fast so we can get to the question and answer period, because I think that's really more important. And the things that are in the content of these notes have been touched on just by about everybody here. The Missoula County Fire Protection Association was founded with the feeling that it had a strong commitment to urban prevention and suppression. And we work on prevention in the areas of school programs, homeowners meetings, and hazard reduction seminars, which really we see a lot of effectiveness in. We're real active in the development and enforcement of interface suppression standards, and we work on that in conjunction with OPG. And that's really been successful for us. In the areas of suppression, we strongly believe in the mutual aid concept. We feel that just because a fire starts in the neighboring jurisdiction, it isn't going to be long till it's in ours. So as an agency or as a association, we strongly support the mutual aid and have seen a lot of good for the county in that area too. We believe in the closest engine response, and we've been really active in the burning permit area, and it was pretty controversial when we started it. A lot of people probably still don't like it, but we've seen a lot of improvement in escape fires since we have been issuing burning permits, get a chance to talk to the individual burners, give them an opportunity to ask us questions on the proper ways to burn. It's worked out really well for us, and I think it's something we'll probably continue for quite a while. Let's see, what was the next question? The concerns are the same for us. We've got a lot of people not familiar with living in the forest. They don't understand the difference between fuel reduction and aesthetics, I think. They come there because they want to be in the wildland areas and don't realize that there has to be some kind of a happy medium in the amount of foliage they've got around the house. With more people come more sources of ignition. These are concerns for us. Increasing time and distance, that's a real problem because with limited funds, and they seem to be getting more limited with the advent of the last legislature and Senate bill. I think it was 195 that capped us all. We aren't able to do a lot of the things we want to do. We have to be a little bit more creative. So the time and distance is increased to responding to the people, the forest dwellers. That's a problem for us. Water supplies, we're basically structure organizations and wildland mix. So water supplies are a big issue for us. I think the growth has outstripped our thoughts toward water supplies, and we've got a lot of urban area or urban and interface areas without or with very limited water supplies. Those are things we're working on. I know with Commissioner Kennedy has a great concern on the water supply issue, and we've been working hand in hand with the Board of County Commissioners on ideas to try and fix that. I touched on the budget constraints, and how do we think the situation can be improved? I think the situation is dramatically improved. I hear a lot of gloom and doom, but it's a whole lot different than it was in 1980 around here, I think. I think we're getting a long ways in the education. I, too, believe that education is the answer to a lot of our questions with some modified regulation. What do you want me to hit here? We need to continue to find new ways to educate, continue to work on subdivision review and regulations, work on the water supply issues, and find new and creative ways to finance our operations. So that may be the hardest one of all. And we need to be kind of far-thinking, maybe as far as consolidation of some of the emergency services in Missoula County, so that we can work more smartly. And with that, I'll just close this and open it up, I guess, to questions and answers. Bruce?
Okay.
What are the insurance companies doing and thinking about preventive measures or measures that will stop fires, such as sprinkler systems, such as reduced rates for sprinkler systems in wildland areas, maybe reduced rates for doing sort of defensible space type things in urban, rural subdivisions? Is the insurance company thinking along these areas at all?
Good questions and a lot of logic in the question. The difficulty that we have is, from the insurance company's standpoint, anytime we change rates, we need to file our rates and the reasons for and why with the insurance commissioner in that given state. And what I would say to you is that we need a good body of data to convince the public regulators that we should have a different price for a home that has 30 feet of defensible space compared to one that has none. We need a different rate for a house that has wood-shake roof compared to one that has asphalt shingles or UL-rated metal or whatever it may be. And so those are some of the problems in terms of a pricing matrix, if you will. You can make that matrix so complex that not only can the people trying to administer it, an insurance company couldn't understand it, but couldn't persuade a regulatory body at the insurance commissioner's office that it had merit. Right now, I know our company is struggling with the issue of damageability of various types of roof with regard to hail. It's only logical that somebody who has a wood stove should pay a higher premium than someone who does not. Last year, we instituted a surcharge for wood use. And the logic is simple. My home will never burn from a wood or solid fuel fire because those heating devices are not present in my home. With regard to distances, we heard this discussion brought up before. Most fire insurance rates are based on distance from a responding fire department. The Fire Protection Class Index is provided to the insurance industry by a group out of Denver, the insurance service offices. And about once every decade, I believe it is, they'll come through and they'll review a fire department standing. They'll look at equipment, people, training, water capacity, whether it be in the form of hydrants or whether it be in tanking capability, and they will assign an index. Generally speaking, the lower the number, the more favorable your rates. So some of that comes back to the tax base. If you live in a rural community and have fire protection class 9, you're not going to have the same rates if you're over 5 miles that you would enjoy if you were in Missoula, where they have hydrants and 24-hour sleepers. So that's a complex issue. The third thing that I'll real quickly address is the issue of discounts that you asked for. I'll get back to that notion that the $300, $400, $500 premium that you pay, depending on the price of your home, your deductible, and so forth, supports many perils. And it's very difficult in a competitive market. If you were to call 10 insurance companies, I would bet you that you probably would not find $50 difference in a $500 premium. Now, my question to you is, how much further can an insurance company discount that if you put in a sprinkler system? If we're already at a very competitive rate supporting not only your fire risk, but risk of theft, risk of litigation, risk of internal water pipe freezing, and please take note that a sprinkler, while it's a fine fire suppression device, we pay a lot of money out on water losses. gee, my washing machine, I left it running while I went to the store, and guess what? It's all over the basement, and we need one of those water extractor fellas to come out, and it's $1,800. So you kind of have a trade-off there. Did that, I hope that...
Yeah, that was interesting. One of the things that was kind of a paradox of the ISO, Insurance Services Organization, and that is they have this rating system, and they don't count anything for fire prevention.
The only thing I can tell you is I get back to that notion that it's a mindset on your part. If you want rates to go down, when you buy from the insurance company, you're signing up with a pool of insureds. And the pool that has the lowest losses is going to have the lowest price. So collectively, if we at State Farm get real competitive, part of it is by convincing you folks who are our clients potentially to improve your fire risk. And if we never had a fire in the wild zone, never had one within the city limits, the rates are going down. If we have a lot of incidents, the rates are going up.
Any more questions? Yes.
I have a couple suggestions. I very much disagree, is it John? With your assessment that I live in the wildland-urban interface, and your assessment was that you feel like you've done a lot of education, and people pretty much know the risks by now. My neighbors don't know the risks. And if they do, well, I just don't think they do, but they're doing absolutely nothing. Most of my neighbors are doing nothing to mitigate the risks. So from your perspective, I think you all live with this. This is very real to you. This is very abstract. I mean, it's a paradox. We're living in the woods, and it's abstract to a lot of the people that are living in the woods. Some have moved in from areas where there are no wildfires. Fire suppression has erased this. People have a fairly limited horizon in terms of remembering the realities. So I disagree with you. I think you're right in terms of getting agencies to, or getting the public to understand all this whole array of agencies. You all seem to be familiar with, there are many agencies represented in this room. It's totally baffling to me as a civilian. I can't even remember, I don't know the acronyms, I can't remember the titles, I don't understand the overlap and the interplay between these agencies. I think you're right. I think that when you're dealing with clients and when you're trying to educate them, maybe just a flyer that says, here are the agencies that can answer your questions. Because all of you, almost all of you mentioned the word education, and someone said aggressive education. I think that's absolutely true, but from my perspective, I have taken it upon myself to educate myself, but I'm really motivated. And I find that a lot of people aren't motivated, but they need to learn too. I mean, everybody needs to learn, and some people are going to take the steps themselves, and some people just have to have things served up to them in a way that's easily accessible. Which leads me to my next suggestion, that is that education of the risks of the fuel buildup, and as you, Philip, talked about, managing fuel buildup is well and good. 10 days ago, I just got an example of education of people who are trying to manage the fuel buildup. We just about had a fire already in our neighborhood. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Fortunately, I was in here in town, or I would have had a coronary because it just about lit my property on fire. Some yahoo that just moved in lit a gigantic slash pile that was burning fine all day. They had 3 of them down there, at least they had some people down there. At 3:30 in the afternoon, it moved over to a couple firs and went straight up, half a dozen fir trees, probably 25 feet off the ground. Another neighbor saw the flames bending down over the road toward my property, went running down. One guy was running around the fire saying, should I call 911? Should I call 911? Just, total panic. Yeah, right. And so my neighbor began, he just started yelling orders to dump dirt on the fire. So what that told me, and finally burned out in the trees, what it told me is not only education beforehand, but also, and I think, Philip, you mentioned this, and I totally agree with you, we all need detailed education, not just, hey, there's going to be a fire in your neighborhood at some point. People need to know, how do you prune? Where do you get pruning tools? How do you build a slash fire? When do you burn that slash pile? Do you make it 10 feet tall? I've learned over 22 years of working on my property, I need to do small ones that are within 8 or 10 feet of each other, and they burn fast and hot, and they're over with. They don't sterilize the ground for 100 years, and they also don't get away from me. And I can control them because I'm right in the vicinity, but trust me, it's not enough to say, you're going to have a fire, you need to do something about it. People need to know how to mitigate the risk.
Yeah, well, that's one part, that's why some of us are here, and yourself included. You know, like you're saying, you're motivated to be here to learn, and that's why you're here. But your neighbors aren't, because they're not motivated to be here, and they're only going to learn if they want to. The problem the fire agencies have is trying to educate those people, because there's not just one or two, there's thousands out there like that. And unless we have help from like the insurance companies and land developers and city planners, then we can't do it, because we can't address those thousands of people. We don't have the resources or the manpower or money to do that. But, you know, one thing you can do is, you know, like Larry said, we have done, and I agree with him, what we can do. But if people don't want to learn, there's not much we can do unless we have help from like Steve and the other guys up there, and you know, even the news media at times to educate people. I mean, we only have so much money in our budget and so many people that work for our departments, so there's only so much we can do.
But there's another thing that you're missing, and there's two levels of this battle that can be fought simultaneously. One is at this level by these kinds of people, and there's another level that this lady could be the focus of. And a prime example of this is the subdivision up by Sea Lake, Double Arrow, where an intensive educational effort was started, probably something similar to a lady like this who is concerned, and the agency started focusing on her and supporting her, and that whole process has changed up there, where they've gone in and actually logged that whole subdivision, changed covenants on the roofs, I think. Isn't that right, Linda? Mm-hmm. And all kinds of things. So using an opportunity like I just saw presented to you here by this lady, and if one of you guys doesn't get her name, I'm going to, because I'm going to meet her. You need to focus and put some effort here, because there's a community there that she could stir up and get interested. They're sensitive. They just had a fire. It's time to strike.
But how does a government agency do that? And, you know, the public wants more and more and more, and they're giving you less and less and less to do it. You know, we're running 2 months worth of school programs because we feel it's important to educate the populace when they start young, and then to jump on this opportunity takes you away from.
One of the keys that I see is to go grab a guy like Steve, who's got lots of resources, and in particular, in this case, some wildland-urban interface resources, and form a partnership and support this lady. None of us can do it all by ourselves anymore. I think there's a lot of effort, and it needs to be a lot of focus in public-private partnerships, interagency partnerships, and Steve, you were going to go somewhere with the same.
I was just going to take the notion, just make the point, I was just going to take the notion that, start this idea out, a friend of mine who says, I'd rather be lucky than good. You know, good is why you people are here tonight. You want to get educated. A lot of you are going to take this information and do something with your property at a later date. But the difficulty is, you probably don't want to live in a society where you have the fuel mitigation penalties on your property annually. You probably don't want to live in a society that tells you your roof is old and it's bothering the neighbors because it's unsightly, so it must be changed. And those are the issues that I struggle with from a private property right and so on and so forth. But the key here is that you can make a difference, and the position you want to be in the urban interface zone is that if a fire sweeps through there, you want to be the smug person with your property intact with a smile because you did something about it. But if other people choose not to, they've entered into private contracts with their insurance company to rebuild their property, and they and their insurance company lost because we can write a $250,000 check in 48 hours. We can have smoke mitigation people in a food fire and the same day it's happening. But with a $250,000 check in your hand, you've got to go back through the architects, the building people, and all this stuff, live in a motel, and it's your life that's miserable. So what you want to do is prevent that, period. And if that doesn't spur you to action, I don't think we can ever legislate through government action, common sense, prudence, good judgment, nor will we be able to. But if you want help or information, be glad to help.
One of my problems with that, though, is it's not just a contract between you and that person. It affects me. It puts my people in danger trying to go deal with that problem. You know, I end up having to pay more to the insurance industry because of that person. I have to pay more to the government because of that person. So, you know, if it were just between you two and it was just that person's decision, fine, have at it. But that decision affects me.
I see your point, and I think that part is well taken, but I don't, some of that's your job, just like paying the claims are once they happen in my job. That's the profession you choose, and you're right, you don't want to see your people put at risk any more than either of us want to see families at risk due to fire. But I don't think that there's anybody on this panel who would refuse to come out to a neighborhood meeting and spend an hour and a half and say, here's the information, let's talk, let's look, let's see what we can do, make recommendations. But after that, we're probably not going to be out there with a lawnmower helping you. That's your property, not mine.
Let's say I hate to beat a dead horse, but I think that I don't know collaborative effort right now. I mean, I know there's been some communication between the DNRC and the Association of Realtors, but I don't know real active cooperative effort to improve the situation right now. And I think the communication that I referenced before has to occur between us as agencies, so that we can outreach. I mean, we have an opportunity as realtors in this community to reach the lion's share of these people moving into the interface. Let's face it, they're the ones that have the money, I mean, so I think we really do have an opportunity to reach these people, and if we can communicate as a group, I think we can immediately improve the situation starting today. I mean, we can get real elementary with it as well. We can go back to Three Little Pigs, But I think wherever we start, we need to start today to improve the situation, and I think it can be done. I think it can be done tomorrow.
John, what's the average today for how often a house sells? Used to be like 7 years.
It's still in that area, maybe even a little quicker in the Missoula area, in the greater Missoula area.
So that means, in reality, two different things. One is the realtors would have an opportunity at least once every 7 years or less. But the more significant issue there is that population has changed, probably on average once every 7 years. So the efforts that we did here in Missoula County 7 years ago may be totally inappropriate. In fact, they probably are inappropriate because the audience has changed. They've become more sophisticated. I would also submit to you that they expect a level of service from where they came from, which doesn't look like anything that we provide anywhere in Montana today. And that's a big issue that somehow we need to figure out how to address. Mark?
And Steve, I think you make a case for that dreaded word regulation, because regulation offers an opportunity for consistency. And Steve, or pardon me, John may look at regulation as something that's really being suppressive, and I think regulation in a little different light is something that really is being supportive of what we really want to accomplish. And let's face it, if we didn't have a regulation for people running through red lights, there may be more accidents and deaths, and we all acknowledge that we live by the regulation to stop at red lights just in order to avoid that graver consequence. So I think hand in hand with education, regulation definitely has a part to play, if for no other reason than to develop some consistent standards on how not only we live in the interface, but how we develop an attitude, moral ethic, and also a land use in that interface. So regulation has to be part of it, in my view, just simply because of the pressures that we have on the interface itself.
We're homeowners up in Frenchtown, Sorrel Springs, and we've been to forestry meeting a couple weeks ago on the controlled burn that they had, demonstration project and such. And what I hope to do is bring that back to the homeowners association. But the problem is, again, you've all talked about education, and we're talking about how we're motivated being here. The problem is people are educated different ways. I mean, I don't know how many people live in Sorrel Springs, but there isn't a single, is there anybody else here from Sorrel Springs? Okay, so I'm in. All right, so I feel it's my responsibility to go back there and say, hey folks, I found out this from the forestry department, I found out this, but what I would like to be able to do with you people is say, let's go out there and demonstrate something. Let's demonstrate a controlled burn in a populated area. Let's do a pilot project like this. Let's invite people out for coffee in the afternoon and say, hey, we're going to show you how this is going to work and how this might protect sometime in the future. Because those other people aren't going to be here to learn this. They're just not. And you can sit at association meetings until you turn blue, and you can talk and talk and talk to people, but unless they actually see something, they're not going to do it. And it's true, we haven't done anything so far with our place, and we need to, but we want to see something too. So I think that's really critical for movement in a direction where we're going to protect our homes. And you guys have done it up in Sealy Lake.
Well, I'm not with Sealy Lake, but yeah, I researched that with help state, federal, and local fire people, they've really made inroads. And that I work with the Missoula County Fire Protection Association on this issue, and to address what you were saying, John, is that's kind of what we want to do, is pull a plan so that we've identified all of our players and have a role for them. And then also we have the information that when you set a homeowner up to understand that he has to do something, she has to do something, then they have a packet of who do they go to for what particular problem. And yes, you're not going to go out there and help them mow their lawn, but maybe we can make people available like the state foresters do for people who have larger land. I mean, big acreage where they have some maybe merchantable timber or whatever. But yeah, Sealy Lake, they've quite a bit of inroads on there. They've changed their covenants so that they can cut now. Before they couldn't cut a single tree, and they've changed their covenants so that they no longer have wood-shake roofs as mandatory. And they've been able to make money by thinning out their common areas. They made about $30,000, and they've used that to widen their roads, to plan water staging areas. And so I'm really excited about that, and that's what I'm advocating, is these demonstration projects to get people in their neighborhoods to consider this on the ground and not just in the abstract that Kate was talking about.
The County Fire Protection Association is really into what you're asking, and we're as close as you just contacting Scott Waldron, the fire chief in Frenchtown, and he'll put together just exactly what you're asking for. We'll come up and demonstrate to the members of the community that are interested in those types of issues.
I'm sure that we can call neighbors and say, hey, we want to do this burn on 10 acres and see what happens, and protect the house and such, and have them see flames that are this high, and see that it doesn't engulf their home. That's what clicks with people.
Who's the FMO at 9 Mile? Is that recent? Recent in the Montana Ranger District would be another contact. Right. Charlie?
I was going to say, our organization maybe ought to look at inviting some of these people in and seeing what we do and how we act and getting some real good input.
Any other questions? Yes.
I have kind of a comment. You have a real excellent panel up there, but I think the one thing that's missing that landowners need is the consulting foresters and contractors in the area that are available to work with private landowners on these things, like helping you decide how to do the thinning and pruning and do the pile burning. And there are a number of contractors in the Missoula and Sealy Lake areas that more or less specialize in working in urban interface areas.